So just to give you a sense, I have a variety of roles within Deloitte, but I currently serve as our DEI lead for our consulting practice. And that is a practice of about 55,000 people across 4 different countries and close to 30 or so different career models. So complex organization with a variety of different needs from the standpoint of our focus with respect to DEI. I have a few slides, if we don't mind pulling those up. And on these slides, I'll talk through a few different things with you. First and foremost, to give you a sense, and this ties to an earlier poll question, which I thought was fantastic. And that poll question specifically centered around if people were starting along their particular journey. And if you take a look at the next slide, you'll see that, you know, we at Deloitte have been on this journey focused on DEI for close to 25 years. Initially heavily focused on the advancement of women, that has then progressed to a focus on our minorities, a focus on veterans, and really starting to pinpoint different aspects of people's careers and life trajectories as to when we want to lean in and support our employees in their path through the firm to really be able to achieve not only an inclusive working environment, but in addition to that, being highly focused on helping them become everything that they would like to be from a career standpoint. Now, when you take a look at the next slide, what you'll see is really the way that we think about how you drive inclusion, in particular DEI, across the different aspects within the firm. So frequently we hear people say, I have a strategy around DEI, I'm going to go implement that. And that strategy sometimes has some of these distinct aspects. And what I'll say is, first and foremost, the foundational items that we have flagged here are just the core infrastructure that you need to put in place around things like strategy, culture, data, process is key and can't be overlooked. And that really cascades into an evaluation of not only talent and the programs that you create, but also the culture that needs to be nimble and shift, because the focus areas with respect to DEI, from my experience, pivot frequently on a year-to-year basis and really needing to be responsive. So that's really the foundation that you need to build to have a strong program. Now, when you think about the way that you differentiate the way things that you do, it's really a combination of, are you really matching, the needs and the expectations of your customers or constituents? Are you aligned as a community with all of those that serve you and that supports you? And this is something that, particularly over the last 2 to 3 months, I've seen increase substantially, where different organizations are asking their suppliers, the people that they collaborate with, what are their goals and how collectively they can all work to hold each other accountable. And ultimately the brand that's in place. And lastly, this really gets to kind of enabling areas. And the one in particular that I'll talk about over the next 2 slides is around analytics. And ultimately, it's not solely pulling together data for data's sakes, but how you transform that data into a means by which you can pinpoint specific areas of challenge and also act upon them. So if we take a look at the next slide, what you'll see is the data-driven approach that we have towards DEI at Deloitte. And first and foremost, what we have is a collection of metrics and reports that tie to distinct aspects of our employee lifecycle. So how many people are we hiring? Who is exiting the firm? Who is being promoted? How are people, what's the demographics associated with our leadership teams? Such that if you look across that particular life cycle, including how we develop people and who is selected for specific development programs, we can make determinations and provide increased visibility on our, not only the challenges that we have, but how we can address those challenges. So from a visibility standpoint, we have, our workforce is quite young. I would say we have 4 different generations within our workforce, skewed heavily towards those who are younger than the age of 30. So we have plenty of calls for visibility and making clear to our teams and our staff that, like, when you think about DEI data and how you drive and make decisions on it, never forget the importance of, or the challenges with respect to handling that PII, but that it's really critical that when you're handling this data, that you're placing data in the hands of people who can act upon it. A challenge I've seen a number of times with respect to organizations is that they will have DEI data that will sit within a siloed part of the organization in the hands of 4 to 5 people that really prevents, leaders who are making decisions on who they hire, who joins their team, how do they utilize them on their team, how do they promote them. And if they're doing that in an equitable fashion, they're preventing from doing so. So really, when you think about the visibility of the data, placing it in the hands of the people who can act upon that data while simultaneously protecting the PII is absolutely critical for progress. Now, how do we use the data? Generally, what we do is that we have distinct types of data that we will perform analysis on a periodic basis. And I'll give you an example, a detailed example in just a moment. And that particular, that analysis we do on effectively a quarterly basis, right? Because the key thing that I have noticed in my experience has been, if you are being successful with your efforts, you will notice that your DEI challenges will in fact change. And really making sure that you don't continue to solve the problem today, which has not really been a problem for 5 years. And an example of that, for years for us within our firm, we had challenges from a recruiting standpoint, where we did not feel like we were getting our fair share off of college campuses, for example, of women and also of minorities. So we implemented a series of distinct items and then had this kind of legacy that, or excuse me, this hypothesis and this belief that was still in place that, like, that was our core challenge. And only by doing analysis of data on a quarterly or annual basis can you get people to focus away from that particular challenge to really what we're really addressing right now within our organization, of retention of our people who are 2 to 3 to 4 years within their career, right? And so ultimately having that usage and that recurrence of the evaluation such that you can get to that point is key. And lastly, accountability. Data and analysis without accountability, I feel, is in many respects leaves you in a pretty challenged position to drive impact. So from an accountability standpoint, we do a number of distinct items. We do goal our leaders towards specific items that are in their control. So for example, if you run part of the organization, does that part of the organization actively groom and recruit women and people of color, for example? We also are very key on making sure that the efforts that are taking place in things along the talent life cycle, as I addressed before, like recruiting, are we hiring off of campuses, to the same degree with which that is reflective of the demographics of the campus? Or, for example, if we are hiring an experienced hire, are we tracking that for the women who exit the organization, that we have a pipeline of diverse candidates that we could bring in at any point in time? And along all of those individual items, we're holding people accountable based upon their role within the organization. Now, the last slide that I'll show you here is just a detailed example of how we do this in action. So, for example, we have been very focused on data that we built into what we call a consulting inclusion dashboard, right? And that is a fair amount of representative data, specifically around women, minorities, and veterans. And with respect to this data, we probe distinct questions, such as what percentage of our senior consultants, which is a mid-career professional for us, are men versus women, minorities versus non-minorities. Are we seeing high attrition at specific levels? Are we seeing there being a lengthy period of time that people are spending at level that is differentiated between, let's say, our minorities and non-minorities? And when we're able to probe things in that particular fashion, we're able to get to a point where we can pinpoint specific issues in very minor parts of the organization and customize our strategies and our actions in a way that historically we were unable to do due to the lack of this data and our increasing ability to analyze it and drive actions from it. Now, what I will say in closing is I do love the conversations and the key ends associated with data. I think that reporting and also distinct analysis of this nature are very, very key from the standpoint of being able to show definitive progress. And I would say the thing I would highly encourage all of you as well is how we think tactically about making that data available to the people who really can make decisions, while also updating others on the progress that we're fundamentally making in these areas. So with that, I hope that was a helpful overview.